Hey, what's up, guys? Gonna do a kind of a deck profile on this Esper Reanimator deck, and it's not my idea originally or anything like that, so I'm not gonna take any credit for that. But basically, I'm gonna go over I guess, my build and some of my own card choices, and um, kind of explain to you the idea of the deck. It's pretty simple, and some other variations and other things you can try out with this deck, and it's pretty cool. So I've been testing it in best of one. This deck is namely built for best of one. You can play it in best of three, but the sideboarding is kind of awkward, and it's very prone to being taken down by graveyard removal and hate. So just be kind of careful of that. Obviously, most people don't play any sort of graveyard hate in their main deck, so this deck is fairly safe to play as a best of one deck because you don't have that fear as much. So, reason why I decided to pick up this deck was I've been kind of watching a lot of modern gameplays of different types of Esper deck, and one of the I guess the cool, powerful decks in modern right now is Esper Reanimation, and there's two variations of it. The first variation is the most famous one, being the one that uses Solitude, Grief, and Archon of Cruelty. And how they do it is they use Fateless Looting, they use unmarked unmarked graves, I think. Yeah, as the way to kind of dump those non-legendary cards to the graveyard, and then reanimate it with persist, or some of them use priest or some other way of getting those creatures back on the board and getting value on them, because they each of those creatures, the grief, the solitude, and the archon, they all have great ETB effects, and so when they come out on the board, they provide immediate value. They impact the board immediately, which is great. So I really like that deck. I almost want to make it in real life, but that spent quite a lot of money on Magic right now, so I'm kind of hold off on building anything new. So um, I'm just playing my regular Esper control deck right now, and maybe I'll move in that direction when I got a little bit more funds. The other way to build the Esper deck in Modern is to go the route of I believe it's Monastery Monk or Mentor. So the way they do is they dumped the monk with the mending, or some other way. Maybe I think they might, some of them use unmarked grave also. But basically, you throw the monk in the grave and you cast the 1 mana reanimation spell. I think it's Unearth. Um, and basically bring that monk back, and then you cast a bunch of cantrips, you make a bunch of tokens, and you aggro your opponent to death with that. And they sometimes even drop in a Murktide or something like that to kind of back the monk up, because they do cycle through their deck quite quickly, and they dump a lot of stuff in the graveyard, and it plays more of a plays more of a aggro deck than a control deck. But yeah, that's the other way to build the deck. So yeah, in modern, pretty cool. That Esper has that ability to kind of do that, and utilize the grave in a way that uh, they weren't doing before. 'Cause the only deck that was really using the grave, I guess, was mostly like decks that were red and black, because they have like um, they have what's his face, the Titans and stuff like that, or the Lurus, and a lot of good one drops were red or black cards, and so Rakdos was usually the way to go when you wanted to use your grave, not so much reanimation. But yeah, Esper seems like to be the best way to go with reanimation. So this deck is kind of like a derivative of that. Um, in Historic, we don't have many good ETB triggers, and so instead of focusing on ETB triggers, We're going to be focusing more on static abilities, which are very strong in of itself. The cool thing about the Archon Cruelty build in Modern is that they use Ephemerate, and Ephemerate provides additional value um, to their creatures, and that's how they kind of have that high ceiling and that power level. They're just really, really good. Unfortunately, with any Reanimator decks, because we're trading a lot of power for consistency, so the decks aren't very consistent, and they obviously get really hurt by graveyard disruption or just disruption in general. So that's just the thing. And to kind of prevent that, they use grief or Thoughtseize to kind of remove those disruption. So with this deck, I've seen kind of floating around. I've seen a couple of variations of it, and this is kind of my take on it. And let me think. There's the other way you can build this deck is by going Mardu instead of Esper. What Mardu provides you with is that it provides you with access to Fateless Looting, I think Thrilling Discovery, and that one new card. Let me look it up real quick. I think it's called Season Pyromancer. There you go. Yeah, so Season Pyromancer. So those three cards provide you a pretty consistent, fast way to dump stuff from your hand into the graveyard and draw a lot of cards. And we have the similar abilities with in the blue version here too. The one thing I like about playing blue over red is that all of our cantrips and stuff like that, they're instant speed, meaning that we're able to dump stuff during our opponent's turn rather than having to do it during our turn. So there's a couple of good things about that. Good thing about that is, one, it makes it harder for our opponent to interact with our graveyard. They're not gonna nuke our graveyard if we don't have anything in there. We can just dump it on their turn, let them commit to their play, then dump our payoffs in our graveyard during their turn, and then during our turn we'll go ahead and reanimate stuff, and that kind of puts our opponent in an awkward situation. So being able to play at instant speed is very valuable, more than you think in a combo deck like this. So yeah, that's just kind of like the thing I like about blue, playing blue over red. And the other cool thing is we're able to play some counterspell and interaction. While we're not a true control deck, being able to counter some of our opponent's removal, disruption, and interaction makes this deck stronger than the red one. Because the problem with Reanimator decks is if they hit our graveyard or they wipe our board, we have a very tough time kind of recovering from that. And we're playing a lot of cantrips that are minusing us cards, and so with red there's really no way to plus. Red doesn't really have that ability to kind of draw you additional cards, where blue it does have that ability to kind of draw you additional cards if you need it, especially in the form of like an Archmage Charm here, or a Memory Deluge, and stuff like that. So I'll kind of talk about my card choices here, and we'll kind of go over the idea of the deck, and yeah, I'll test it out in some gameplay videos soonish. So far I've played maybe 4 or 5 games, and I think I've won all of them so far. So that's pretty good sign that this deck kind of works, I guess. Granted, I've only playing them in best of 1. Like I mentioned, this deck might struggle a little bit more in the best of 3 because of sideboarding, and while I did make a sideboard, I kind of just threw it together because I really haven't tested it in best of three, so I have no idea if this side would work or not. So I'll go ahead and start off with the explanation, and if you have any tips or suggestions at the end of the video, just leave a comment down there, and I'll take a look at it, and yeah, hopefully we'll improve this deck. So Consider's a pretty good cantrip here. Let's just cycle through our deck, looking for either lands that we need or just reanimation, or basically any card um, that we might need, and cards that we don't need if we have a lot of lands in our hand already, or if we have if we come across a payoff, we just throw it in the graveyard, draw a card. So I think Consider here probably going to be our best choice of cantrip to play, and being able to play during our opponent's turn is great. Bone Shard, just kind of removal, uh, a way for us to kind of, if we have Stitches on board, we can sacrifice her and um, kill something and mill 3, so these two together work really well. I'm only playing 3 because I had to cut one out to play Archmage's Charm here, and I'll explain the why. I'll explain a little bit later in the video why I decided to play this here, and why I think it's kind of important too in this particular deck. So yeah, so I'm playing 3 bones, playing 4 stitches. Stitches is going to be our main way to kind of get our payoffs in the graveyard and kind of add that consistency. We don't mind milling ourselves because both of our reanimation cards, they both have a way to basically flashback from the grave. So if we don't have it in our hands, we're not too worried. We're okay with just completely milling either our payoffs or our reanimation into our graveyard. So that's why Stitch is pretty good. Unfortunately, we don't have Unmarked Graves. Unmarked Graves would definitely be better here because we can choose what we put in our grave, versus this, we're kind of just rolling the dice to see what we can throw in there. But yeah, I think she's very important to play at 4 here. Next, we have Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize are one of our only ways to kind of get rid of things that might hurt us. Either it's a counter spell or some sort of graveyard hate. Thoughtseize is also another way to kind of buy us time. We want to be getting rid of our opponent's early game stuff. Since we ourselves aren't playing that many removal or interaction, we want to kind of interact with their hands to kind of get rid of their stuff and make their turns a little bit worse. Because most of our turns is just spent just kind of putting stuff in the graveyard. We're not really doing too much to interact with their board and their plays. We're essentially kind of playing solitaire. So if you think about it that way, we're playing solitaire with ourselves to set up our graveyard to have big payoffs. So Thoughtseize is just one of those ways where we can kind of interact with our opponent. Faithful Mending here, I like this a lot better than Fateless Looting. 2 reasons. One reason is the life gain that you do get for an extra mana. Well, I guess for an extra mana you get the life gain, and you also get the ability to play at instant speed. And I think that's absolutely both of those are vital to this kind of strategy here. Fateless Looting by no means is a bad card. It's great for what it does, especially in Izzet and stuff like that, or the Mardu version of the deck. However, I think because, like I said, we're playing solitaire, we're not really interacting with our opponent's board, and if you're playing aggro or something like that, we need to buy time, and Fateless Mending does buy us a bit of time. If we're playing against control, Fateless Mending allows us to dump stuff during their turn, play during their turn, and during our turn we'll be able to reanimate and stuff like that. So I think the mending is very, very important, and it's what makes the Esper version of the deck better than the Mardu version. Our first way of reanimating stuff is going to be with the priest here, and reason why I maxed out on her is I think she's really good turn 2 drop also. So turn 2, if we can, the ideal turn ratio is either to play like a Consider or Stitches, and maybe if we get lucky we can get one of these in our graveyard. Turn 2 we play the priest. Turn 3 we'll just go ahead and sacrifice the priest and get our payoff after, you know. So that's the idea is by turn 3, hopefully if everything goes well, we'll have one of these payoffs on the board, and then our opponent has to answer that. The bad thing about priest is that she's weak to removal, just like anything else. Um, if our opponent's playing a lot of removal and she doesn't stick, it does kind of hurt and does kind of suck. But I think she's pretty invaluable, and the earlier we see her in our turns, the better. So maxing her out at 4, I think, is the best thing to do here. So a couple cards I had to cut out just to fit this card in here. And Archmage Charm, I think, plays a pretty vital part of the deck that is missing, and what helps this keep this deck or basically to protect our strategy from crumbling here, and that's Archmage Charm. So Archmage Charms provide us with one of two things here: a way to kind of rebuild our hand, because with Reanimator decks we're normally trying to ditch cards from our hand, so we're mostly always minusing, and so we need a way to kind of plus. And so that's why I think the blue in this, the Esper version, the blue cards provide more consistent results and a way for us to generate advantage over the red version. The red version does have the ability to end the game a little bit quicker, because the pyromancer and stuff like that. And it does provide a slightly better way for them to kind of deal with some graveyard hates in the form of like artifact removal, which Esper doesn't really have that great of a way of answering. But I think us being able to play counter spells is very important too. So this deck, while we have Emercy to kind of provide some protection, this deck is very weak to removal. So if they kill our payoffs or they board wipe us, we're gonna be behind again, and we're gonna have to try to find some way to kind of reanimate our stuff. And I think the Archmage Charm, being as flexible as it is, will provide that kind of like missing key to the deck. Our mana base isn't necessarily set up to support Archmage Charm, but I think still good enough to be played. And you could choose to play maybe 2 copies instead of the 3, but I opt to play the 3 because I think seeing it in your hand and leaving it in there is kind of good, and that's fine. The other card I was thinking of trying out is maybe Memory Deluge. Memory Deluge, I guess it kind of synergizes with this deck because you can dump it into the graveyard and you have the flashback cost too, which is kind of cool. But obviously I don't think flashback is too necessary because we're never going to really be getting to turn 7 or 7 mana. The game's usually going to end before we get to that point, so don't think Memory Deluge is super necessary. Granted, it provides better consistency, but I think Archmage Charm here will provide that. Will provide us both protection and card advantage, which what is missing in this deck here is that. Next off, we have Wrath of God. So, but just based off the couple games I play here, Wrath of God will allow us to kind of stabilize in certain situation, because there are still plenty of aggro decks and stuff like that, and because we're kind of playing solitaire, we're not really interacting with our opponent as much as we should be. And so yeah, Wrath of God will kind of reset the board, and it will also allow us to kill our Stitcher. It'll allow us to kill our Jin, and I'll explain the reason why that's kind of important a little bit later here. But yeah, I think Wrath of God, or at least some sort of board wipe, maybe 1 or 2 copies is necessary in this deck. Same thing with the Archmage Charm, because these 2 cards kind of provide us um, kind of like a fallback option, I guess. So if we're ahead, we use this to protect ourselves. If we're behind, we're gonna use this to stabilize. So that's the two thing that these cards provide. And if we don't need like Wrath of God, we can always just dump it with the mending, or whatever. So that's why I opt to play these two cards here. The Unburial Rites, I don't think 4 copies is super necessary. Um, Unburial is kind of bad to be casting at 5 mana. You ideally want to be casting this at 3 mana, or sorry, not 3 mana, the 4 mana cost, the flashback cost. I found that 4 gets a little cloggy in my hand, and 2 is not enough. So I think it sitting at 3 is probably going to be our best option. Because basically, um, if you're looking at it like this, our deck is like this. So we're not really casting anything for 5 mana at all. At 5 mana, we're probably going to be Fateless, mending plus like one of the combination of these cards or something like that, or a combination of these cards. So at 5 mana, we shouldn't really be casting Unburial. Obviously we have the option to, but I think ideally you want to be aiming for that 4 mana threshold there. So that's kind of like the basic core of the deck. In terms of the payoffs here, I'm not playing that many payoffs because I think I have enough consistency with the Consider, the Stitches, and the Faithful, and the Archmage Charms to get where I need to be, and to dump what I need to dump. And so I don't think I need to play that many payoffs. And plus, you don't want to see too many of these in your opening hands either, because that will force you to mulligan or something like that. If you're opening up like 3 or 4 of these cards in your hand, you're just gonna be dead. So yeah, I think 6 to 7 payoffs is good enough for this deck. Any more than that will make your hands really clunky. And any less than that, then it makes your reanimation that much worse. So I think 6 to 7 is the right amount to play. In terms of the playoffs, Jin Gitaxias here, one of the best Praetors that we have. So like I mentioned earlier, we don't have many great ETB effects in the game for Historic, so the next best option is to have really good static abilities. And the Praetor creatures, the Phyrexian creatures, basically, they have the best static abilities in all of Magic, essentially. Correct me if I'm wrong, but for what they do, is very powerful, especially if you play EDH. Someone casts like a Jin on you, or a Shodred, then yeah, you're just in the world of pain. So they always kind of deserve respect. They always deserve an answer. Otherwise, you're just gonna lose to them. So Jin here will draw us our cards that we need to kind of play, and if he survives during our opponent's turn, it's going to reduce their hand to 0, so they're going to be discarding their hand to the graveyard. So that's what Jin is good for. Problem with Jin is we have a high probability of killing ourselves with it, so we want to be using Bone Shards and maybe Wrath of God to get rid of the Jin after 1 or 2 turns, because after 1 rotation with him, I think he'll serve his purpose, and he can be sent elsewhere, sacked to the graveyard or something. Because if you keep him on board and you have no way of finishing off your opponent, you're gonna be essentially decking yourself out. Because this deck is kind of fast that way. Because you're dumping, you're drawing maybe 3 to 4 cards a turn, maybe milling 3 to 4 cards a turn. And that's Jin is kind of dangerous. It's a double-edged sword, essentially. You're never going to be casting for 10 mana. I don't see us ever getting to that point. So reanimate him, get rid of him when you're done with him, and yeah. Shodred, really good value card, especially in a 1v1 situation. It's going to force our opponents to make some pretty awkward decisions. If they don't get rid of her, she acts as another reanimator or reanimation, so she doubles her value essentially every turn, so pretty good. I feel like playing one of each of the legendary creatures is good enough. You don't really need to double up. If they somehow exile or get rid of them, you have other payoffs, so not too worried about that. Sarah's Embassy, really good Modern Horizon 2 card. Um, can make you basically unkillable in some sense. Like if you really need to, you can choose creatures, and basically they won't be able to really deal any damage to you, unless it has an ability or something like that. Mainly you're gonna be casting her. You're gonna be calling either sorcery or instant. Normally it's instants, because instants are the one way to kind of snipe her and snipe some of your other creatures, and so, or whichever. So she's really good if you can cast her twice, or if you can get her out on the board twice, or maybe even like 3 times or whatever. She can kind of seal the deal there. Obviously, she does not provide you indestructible, so you can still be board wipe. In some senses, you can still be you know minus hard enough that you she might die or whatever. So great card, just um not the best finisher, but kind of a great card to grind your opponent out and make it really awkward for them to deal with. Schnorn kind of acts as our other stacks card. She won't win you the game on its own, unless against certain decks she will. Against decks that are very low mana value, there's nothing they can do to kind of get around her. Like if you're playing against elves or something like that, this card will just absolutely wreck them. Like the moment they enter the battlefield, unless they have a buffing ability or something themselves, they're gonna be just instantly dying to Elish Norn. So she's good in that sense. Her +2 ability, giving us +2/+2 or whatever, doesn't really matter too much. I mean, I guess it's cool if you can make your stitches at 3/3. That's cool. But our other creatures, they don't really matter too much. Make her a 9/9, cool. Whatever's. And then the final payoff card is Dream Trawler. So Dream Trawler serves several different purposes in this deck. Serves as our way to regain some life outside of the mending. Mending buying us time. You know, is one way to recover life. So both mending and the Dream Trawler kind of combo with each other. Same with the Archmage Charms, you can buff up the Dream Trawler attack, and heal for a bunch too. Discarding effect is also nice. If you need to, you can trigger it, discard one of your payoffs, and then revive them with like a priest or a burial. So yeah, I think Dream Trawler fits pretty well into the deck, and provides the necessary kind of protection and synergy with the deck. Some other payoffs you could try. You can try maybe the Green Praetor, Vorinclex. I opt not to play him because he will make it so that our opponent can't play, but at the same time, they can maybe play around him, and so I decided not to play him in this particular deck, but I might try him out in the future, later down the line. I think I've seen other payoffs in terms of red. I've seen the Dracosaph as one of them, or Itali, or the big sea serpent guy that draws you a card every time they cast a non-creature. So I've seen other different payoffs, but I think these payoffs right here are good enough, and they're kind of pretty generalized, and they will work in pretty much any situation. So yeah, I think this is good right here. In terms of the mana, we are gonna be wanting to go pretty quickly, so we're gonna want a lot of untapped land as much as possible, especially turn 1, which is why you'll see how many shocks we're playing. We're playing a total of 11 shock lands plus a couple of basic lands here. So because turn 1, we want to be, if we have these in your hands, we're going to be wanting to cast them as soon as possible. We're going to want to cast Thought Seizes, the Supplier, the Consider. Next turn we want to almost be casting the Priest or the Faithful Mending, because this deck needs to go kind of quickly. we're not a control deck, so we're not really trying to buy that much time or stalling out the game that much. We want to stall out the game against aggro decks so that we can survive to get to the late game. But if we're playing against another um, control match, we want to be going quicker than they are. So having untapped land turn 1 is very important, which is why we're playing 11 shocks. We're also playing 11 check lands just to get us those colors. There's other lands you can play. I mean, this is just what I had, so I kind of just threw it together here with my 8 checks and 11 shocks. In terms of the basic lands, we're playing the basic lands to give our check lands something to go off of so that they come in untapped. And the fact that in case we're playing against something like a Field of Ruin or Assassin's Trophy or something like that gives us a way to search our lands. And we're not really paying any Fable Passage or anything because Fable is kind of slow for this deck. Turn 4, we might be wanting to cast like stuff like Archmage's Charm and stuff like that. Turn 1 and stuff. So no Fable Passage. We don't need to fill our graveyard. We don't need to thin our deck because we're already doing that a lot already. So that's not really necessary. The one Phyrexian Tower here, and this is to help us sacrifice the Jhin if we needed to, or sacrifice the Stitch. It's a legendary land. You could play 2 copies if you want to see it more often in your hand or not. I only play 1 because it's only it gives us a colorless, and we don't really need to sacrifice our creature that much. It's not very important. I guess it kind of acts as ramp too. So if we had Stitch and we milled into a one of these, turn 2 we can sack the Stitch with a Phyrexian Tower, and if we happen to mill a burial and a payoff, we can essentially on turn 2 get one of these out. But that's a very fringe situation, and that doesn't really happen that often. So but it's there, in case you do sack out your opponent. That's what the tower is there for. But yeah, so basically this is kind of my version of the deck. I'll be playing the deck probably later this week here, show you how it works and how I've been playing it. And so far in the games I've test played with it, it's worked really well. It's pretty fast, it's pretty good. Playing during our opponent's turn, having the Archmage Charms to provide protections, and fall a plan B right here. Yeah, it's working pretty good. In terms of if you're gonna take this into the best of 3, here's kind of like a side deck I kind of threw together. I haven't tested it. I have no idea if this would work or not. But it gives you the option in case you do want to try it in best of 3. So we have Portable Hull. Reason we're playing this is we're going to be using this to kind of remove Graveyard Hate and to kind of deal with aggro early game. So this is going to hit stuff like Soul Lantern. It's going to force them to activate it. It's going to force them to do whatever. Hits Rest in Peace, stuff like that. Hits creatures, hits whatever you need to answer there and then. So yeah, Portable Hulls. Soul Lanterns for other graveyard decks to also draw a card. So yeah, I think Lantern can be replaced if you don't think you need it. Yeah, Test of Talents. This could be anything really. I decided to try out Test of Talents to kind of hit perhaps counter spells and stuff like that. Because the deck, it's kind of a combo deck, so we kind of do need some protection from counters or removal in general. So if your opponent's trying to play something like a Infernal Grasp or something to try to remove one of our payoffs, you can just play this and banish all their copies of that, and that way you're kind of technically safe. So yeah, Test of Talents. We don't really need to counter creatures because, like I said, we're gonna kind of ignore their creatures most of the time. We're just gonna be playing our big creatures and having them deal with it. So if we happen to play Ceres and call creatures, we can just make our stuff unblockable and kind of go face and go ham there. So yeah, test of talent pretty good. Vanishing Verse, same idea as Portable Hole, except this time it'll hit something like Leyline in the Void, which Portable Hole can't hit. So yeah, it'll hit like monocolor hate. So it also hits like Rest in Peace, stuff like that. So yeah, I think Vanishing Verse does serve a purpose here. And yeah, uh, Mystical Dispute, same idea as kind of Test of Talents to protect ourselves from other blue decks. Um, like I mentioned, you can probably replace this with something else if you like. You could probably play a Dovin's Veto instead if you think that's going to provide you a better solution. Yeah, just two of that. Ashiot for additional graveyard hate and to mill ourselves. So I would say is worth playing the deck. If anything, to just self mill and to hit other graveyards. Cleansing Nova to act as a acts as both to wipe out other artifacts, to wipe out other enchantments that we hate. So yeah, I like Cleansing Nova. It's in my Esper control deck. It's always provided what I need it to do. Being able to choose one of them, very flexible. Board wipe removal. A bit more costly than say a Wrath of God, but with the amount of healing we're doing with Faithful Mending, we should be able to get the late game, and we should be able to cast it safely without having too much issue. Next off is Shadow's Verdict. This is kind of a placeholder. Like most of the cards in my sideboard is just kind of a placeholder. So you know, depending on how you play the deck and how you build out the deck, you can kind of just pick and choose your cards and go from there. I'm playing Shadows just to get rid of those annoying indestructible weenies. You know what I mean, like the dog and the Vanguard and stuff like that, or just really annoying small Reanimator stuff that comes back from the grave. Yeah, Shadow's Verdict is meant to kind of kill that. I guess it also serves the purpose of killing Narset. Narset kind of hurts this deck because we want to be drawing a lot, and so it stops our Faithful, stops our Archmage Charm. So Shadow's Verdict is one way to remove it. Our other way to remove like a established Narset is with Vanishing Verse. So yeah, you can up this, or you can up the Vanishing Verse. I didn't want to spend any more rare cards or rare wild cards since I'm kind of down after crafting the Priest here and a few other things. And so that's just how many copies I had, and that's what I'm just throwing into the deck right now, into the side deck. And then more likely this side deck is going to change, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But yeah, if you want to take the deck into best of 3, be my guest and let me know how that works out if you do. Yeah, I think I've went over the deck pretty much every aspect that I can think of. I hope you enjoy my explanation of the deck, and I'll be playing it in the next couple of games. I'll probably test play it a little bit in the play. Maybe I'll just go and take it straight into rank. Also, I like testing stuff out in rank because that gives me the best feel for the deck. Because sometimes if you're playing in just play, people are playing really casual stuff and they're not really playing the best version of their decks, stuff like that. And I would like to test myself against people who are ranking because they put a lot of effort into their deck, I assume, and so we're gonna get the most best test playing out in rank. I think right now I'm sitting at platinum right now. Played a couple of games with the deck and with both my Esper and this deck, or Esper control, and I was able to climb past gold into platinum fairly easily. Here I don't think I'll be climbing into gold this season. I think it's gonna be ending somewhat soonish, like 20 days or so. But yeah, as for the name of the deck, it just means Soul Charge in Italian. There's a Yu-Gi-Oh card called Soul Charge, and in Italian it's called Karika Anime, so I thought it was kind of funny way. And so just have that as my deck right now. Deck name, I guess. Anyways, I think I've rambled on enough. Hope you guys enjoy, and see you guys next time.